Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think most folks are probably here. So when we get started here in a minute, we're going to be starting with chapter 20 of 2 Chronicles. So that's where we're at. We may actually finish 2 Chronicles tonight. We'll see how things go. When last we left off with Jehoshaphat being the king of Judah. And we got a brief glimpse of Israel, which, as we mentioned, is kind of rare in 2 Chronicles. Because basically 1st and 2nd Chronicles is mainly just following Judah. It's sort of written off Israel because at the time 1st and 2nd Chronicles is being written, Israel isn't around anymore and there's no chance of it really coming back. So it's written about Judah, and it's written to the remnant of Judah that's come back out of exile to try and rebuild. And we got this glimpse of Israel in that Jehoshaphat briefly allied himself with Ahab. Found out that was a bad idea. We had this episode where Jehoshaphat sort of pressured Ahab to ask God whether they should attack before they attacked. And so Ahab brought out his usual gang of prophets. I remember the one guy made the iron horns and was running around acting like a bull. You're going to gore him. You're going to get him, you know. And they all said, oh yeah, go for it. You're going to win. And Jehoshaphat said, well, do you have an actual prophet of Yahweh around here someplace we can ask? And Ahab said, well, yeah, we got this one, but he never tells me what I want to hear, right? he only gives me bad news, so you don't want to ask him anything. But Joshua kind of pressed it, so they brought him out, and he said, well, if you go into battle, you're going to die, right? So Ahab said, see what I mean? This is why you don't ask him things. And so even though Ahab decided to go into battle anyway, remember he told Jehoshaphat, well, you wear all your kingly robes, and I'm going to go in just dressed like a regular soldier, right? Because he figured he'd sort of sneak around the prophecy that way, right? Like they'd all go and try and kill the guy who they thought was the king. And what ended up happening was an arrow nailed Ahab anyway, and he died. And so when we left off, Jehoshaphat, even though he'd been chastened a little bit for having allied himself with Ahab in the first place, he went back to Judah and sort of re-upped what he had been doing, which was sending teachers out into the countryside to try and teach people what was in the Torah, what was in the law, so that people could hopefully follow it. I could start being obedient to God. So that's where we left off. That's where we left off last time. So are there any questions before we start tonight?
Have you ever heard the expression?
Yes, I have heard the saying, jumping Jehoshaphat, and there is, to my knowledge, no point at which he jumps anywhere in the Old Testament. So I don't know exactly. Maybe someone was named after him, was involved in some kind of explosion. I don't know.
Or maybe it just both words began
With J. I don't know. But. Okay, chapter 20. After this, the Moabites and Ammonites, with some of the Meunites, came to make war on Jehoshaphat. So this group, remember, these are sort of the cousins, the sort of weird cousins of the the Israelites who are descended from Lot and his daughters, Moab and Ammon, and they're over on the plains on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. So they team up to come and attack Judah. Verse 2, some men came and told Jehoshaphat, a vast army is coming against you from Edom, from the other side of the sea. It is already in Hazazon Tamar, that is in Gedi. Alarmed, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord as he proclaimed a fast for all Judah. The people of Judah came together to seek help from the Lord. Indeed, they came from every town in Judah to seek him. So Jehoshaphat is at least consistent, right? He was going to war before. They were going to go attack somebody. He said, well, we need to ask the Lord first. Now he finds out he's being attacked. He does the same thing. Right? He sets out an order for everyone to fast, for everyone to pray, so they can seek advice from the Lord. Verse 5, Then Jehoshaphat stood up in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem at the temple of the Lord in the front of the new courtyard and said, O Lord God of our fathers, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Power and might are in your hand, and no one can withstand you. O our God, did you not drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend? They have lived in it and have built in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, If calamity comes upon us, whether the sword of judgment or plague or famine, we will stand in your presence before this temple that bears your name, and will cry out to you in our distress, and you will hear us and save us. But now here are men from Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whose territory you would not allow Israel to invade when they came from Egypt. So they turned away from them and did not destroy them. See how they are repaying us by coming to drive us out of the possession you gave us as an inheritance. O our God, will you not judge them? For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are upon you. So Jehoshaphat here is a picture. And remember, this is a picture being given to that little remnant that's coming back to try to rebuild the society, of what you do when you're facing down a threat like this. What you do when you're scared and you don't know what's going to happen. Right? What are the other options? Well, we've seen some of the other options with other kings. Right? One of the options is you go and try and draft your own military. You know? And if you can't get enough that way, then you go and you make an alliance with some other pagan nation. You know, you go to Ahab's son, or you go to Egypt, or you go to someone else and try and make some treaty with them to try and get them to come and help you. Right? Or you run off and hide in the case of some kings, right? But all of those are wrong answers. All those are wrong answers. This is the right answer. Right? This is the right answer. This is him saying, look, if they come into Texas, there's nothing we can do. Right? If you're not on our side, we're going to lose. Okay? So, we need your help. In verse 13, all the men of Judah with their wives and children and little ones stood there before the Lord. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jahaziel, son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite and descendant of Asaph, as he stood in the assembly. He said, Listen, King Jehoshaphat, and all who live in Judah and Jerusalem, this is what the Lord says to you. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours but God's. Tomorrow march down against them. They will be climbing up by the pass of Ziz, and you will find them at the end of the gorge in the desert of Jeruel. You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your position, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. O Judah and Jerusalem, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Go out to face them tomorrow, and the Lord will be with you. Okay, so this was sort of Jehoshaphat's argument, right? He says to God, Look, God, we came here, you brought us here, right? You told us not to wipe out the Moabites and the Ammonites, and we didn't. Right? We didn't wipe them out, like you said. And now they're coming to attack us. And they're trying to take away this land that you gave us. Right? So the argument Jehoshaphat's making is they're not really attacking us, they're attacking you. Right? And that's God's response. God's response is, you're right. So they're not going to be fighting Judah, they're going to be fighting me. You just go down there and watch what happens. He says you go down to the end of the valley and you'll find them. So now we'll see how that pans out. So verse 18, Jehoshaphat bowed with his face to the ground, and all the people of Judah and Jerusalem fell down and worshipped before the Lord. Then some Levites from the Kohathites and Korites stood up and praised the Lord, the God of Israel, with very loud voice. Early in the morning they left for the desert of Tekoa. As they set out, Jehoshaphat stood and said, Listen to me, Judah and people of Jerusalem. Have faith in the Lord your God, and you will be upheld. Have faith in his prophets, and you will be successful. After consulting the people, Jehoshaphat appointed men to sing to the Lord and to praise him for the splendor of his holiness as they went out at the head of the army, saying, Give thanks to the Lord, for his love endures forever. Okay, so rather than trying to marshal the biggest army he can, getting them all the equipment and gear they can, he says, well, let's get some chanters interspersed. So while we're walking down there to watch God defeat this army, we can sing. Right? And what does he sing? He sings the songs from the temple. Okay? So this isn't really an army, it's a congregation going to worship God. Right? Verse 22, as they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushes against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, who were invading Judah, and they were defeated. The men of Ammon and Moab rose up against the men from Mount Seir to destroy and annihilate them. After they finished slaughtering the men from Seir, they helped to destroy one another. Okay? So God, however he does it, confuses them so that one group ambushes another group. Right? And then after the ambush, the two groups team up to wipe out the third group, and then the two groups fight each other until the whole army's been wiped out. Okay? So instead of the Moabites and the Ammonites coming and teaming up and attacking Judah, they end up going out onto the battlefield and wiping each other out. Verse 24, when the men of Judah came to the place that overlooks the desert and looked toward the vast army, they saw only dead bodies lying on the ground. No one had escaped. So they get there and they find everybody dead. Because when you go to war against God, God wins. So Jehoshaphat and his men went to carry off their plunder, and they found among them a great amount of equipment and clothing, and also articles of value, more than they could take away. There was so much plunder that it took 3 days to collect it. On the fourth day they assembled in the valley of Berakah, where they praised the Lord. This is why it is called the valley of Berakah to this day. Berakah means praise. Then, led by Jehoshaphat, all the men of Judah and Jerusalem returned joyfully to Jerusalem, for the Lord had given them cause to rejoice over their enemies. They entered Jerusalem and went to the temple of the Lord with harps and lutes and trumpets. The fear of God came upon all the kingdoms of the countries when they heard how the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. And the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was at peace, for his God had given him rest on every side. You know, remember, this is the picture we're given throughout Chronicles, right? Of the sort of the perfect situation is that you have peace. Military has peace. You have peace. Everyone's able to just live their life, right? On a plot of land that God's given them, quietly and peacefully. Now, the important point here, as already mentioned, is if you fight against God, you lose. You don't just lose, you end up destroying yourself. We see this picture with the Moabites and Ammonites. But the reality is, especially since we've read 1st and 2nd Kings, and we know what's coming, and the rest of 2nd Chronicles, we know that ultimately Judah's going to end up doing the same thing. Judah's going to end up turning away from God. They're going to end up fighting with him, and they're going to end up destroying themselves. Right? And this is the sad reality that we have in the world as Christians. Right? It would be nice, and I would love to be what's called a universalist. I would love to just be able to say, yeah, God loves everyone, so everyone goes to heaven. Everything is wonderful. Right? It doesn't matter what religion you practice, it doesn't matter what you do. None of those things matter. God loves everybody, everything's fine. Okay. But the reality is we know, not just from Scripture, but especially from Scripture, that there are all kinds of things that we can do in this life, and paths we can go down and pursue that lead away from God. And it's not that they lead away from God and so God gets angry and he destroys you. It's that they lead away from God, and if you keep going in that direction, you destroy yourself. Right? You destroy yourself. And so the sad truth is, there are a whole lot of people in this world, and all of us from time to time, who are in the process of destroying ourselves, who are in the process of going down the wrong road. Right? And this is where it ends up. It ends up in a desert full of dead bodies. Whether it be the Sinai desert full of the dead bodies of the Israelites who disobeyed in the wilderness, or the dead bodies of Moabites and Ammonites out here, that pathway leads to destruction. Because God loves us, He doesn't want us to go down that pathway. But we're still free to do so. We're still free to do so. God wants nothing more than for us to turn from that pathway and come back. Okay. And so this has to adjust not only our attitude of repentance, but when we're looking at other people in our lives, people who we know, people who we love, people who we care about. Okay. This is number one, why we don't judge other people, in the sense that we don't condemn other people. Right? If they're on the wrong path and they're doing the wrong things, they're destroying themselves, we don't add to that, right? By condemning them, trying to punish them, shunning them, screaming at them about how evil they are and how they're going to hell, right? Because that's not what God does to them. God continues to love them and continues to hope and plead with them to turn around and come back. And so that should shift our attitude as well. We need to take the same attitude toward people, no matter how, quote-unquote, far gone we think they are. No matter how far off we think they've gone, our attitude needs to be the same as God's. We need to love them enough. We need to love them enough to want them to come back. Okay? But that also means we have to want them to come back. That also means we don't just say, oh, it's fine. Oh, whatever you want. Oh, if that's how you want to live your life, if that's what makes you happy, that's great. We can't do that either. Because we know where the end of the road is that they're on. Right? That's why St. Paul, when he said his final farewell to the presbyters in Ephesus, he says, remember that I never stopped night and day with tears begging you to be reconciled to God. Right? That was his approach to these people. Begging with them, please, turn around from the direction you're going. So this picture here has both a positive and a negative. Positive and a negative. Okay, so verse 31. So Jehoshaphat reigned over Judah. He was 35 years old when he became king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 25 years. His mother's name was Azubah, daughter of Shilhi. He walked in the ways of his father Asa and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people still had not set their hearts on the God of their fathers. Okay, so he was doing the right things. But you go out into the hinterlands, all kinds of chicanery was afoot. So there's that but. The other events of Jehoshaphat's reign from beginning to end are written in the annals of Jehu, son of Hanani, which are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel. Later, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, made an alliance with Ahaziah, king of Israel, who was guilty of wickedness. This Ahaziah is Ahab's son. He agreed with him to construct a fleet of trading ships. After these were built at Ezion-Geber, Eleazar, son of Dodavahu of Marashah. Dodavahu is also a very good biblical name, if anyone's planning on having or adopting a child. Dodavahu, not taken. Dodavahu of Marashah prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, because you have made an alliance with Ahaziah, the Lord will destroy what you have made. The ships were wrecked and were not able to set sail to trade. So, the other little footnote we have to have, aside from Jehoshaphat did pretty good, but he didn't get rid of the high places. The other little footnote is he had this tendency to want to get cozy with Israel, even though Israel wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. First with Ahab, makes the alliance, and then he decides to build a bunch of ships for Ahab's son, and in both cases, it doesn't work out real good. Okay? But because Jehoshaphat is, in the main, at least, trying to follow God and doing what he's supposed to be doing, you notice again, Jehoshaphat doesn't get punished. It's really Ahaziah who gets punished because he loses all his ships. Right? So chapter 21, then Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with them in the city of David. And Jehoram his son succeeded him as king. Jehoram's brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, were Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariahu, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father had given them many gifts of silver and gold and articles of value, as well as fortified cities in Judah. But he had given the kingdom to Jehoram because he was his firstborn son. Okay, so remember, we'd already read about this a little bit, that he had fortified these major cities in Jerusalem, and he put his sons in them, sort of as military commanders, right, to sort of secure his kingdom. Jehoram's the firstborn, so he's the one who inherits the throne, even though he had given all his sons these positions.
Do you think the brothers made fun of Michael because he was the only one with a normal name?
They probably thought he was the weird one.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we've been introduced to these brothers only to have tragedy now strike. Yeah. Verse 4, when Jehoram established himself firmly over his father's kingdom, he put all his brothers to the sword along with some of the princes of Israel. So the apple fell pretty far from the tree in this case. So he not only shows that he's not in the same program as Jehoshaphat in terms of worshiping the Lord, he's practicing realpolitik here. He's yeah. Who is there who might challenge me for this throne?
I was kind of wondering how the
Well, he takes them out.
their claims to keep the people in the cities from rebelling against them.
Well, in this case,
It didn't matter.
it's no longer an issue. Yeah. So Jehoram wipes out, and it says that also some of the prince of Israel. So he even goes around to the other wealthy families who he thinks might try and challenge him to be king, and takes them out too preemptively. All right. So now there's no one who can challenge him, he thinks. Verse 5, Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, because of the covenant the Lord had made with him, the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever. Okay, so he says, basically what this is saying is, God would have wiped him and his family out right there, but for the fact that he had made this promise to David. Right? And now he's the last male descendant of David left because he's just wiped out all his brothers. And to make matters worse, he goes and marries Ahab's daughter and Jezebel's daughter. Verse 8, in the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went there with his officers and all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. So right off the bat, remember the picture of everything's the way it's supposed to be was peace, right? There's peace on all sides. Well, as soon as Jehoram comes in, starts doing wickedness, what's the first thing that starts happening? Edom rebels. Right? Now we've got a war going on with Edom. Second half of verse 10. Libnah revolted at the same time because Jehoram had forsaken the Lord, the God of his fathers. He had also built high places on the hills of Judah and had caused the people of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves and had led Judah astray. So he not only doesn't get rid of the high places, he goes and builds new ones. Right? So he's not only not getting rid of the pagan religion, he goes out and endorses the pagan religion. Verse 12, Jehoram received a letter from Elijah the prophet. Now this letter we didn't have before. Remember, Elijah had all those going on with Ahab. He was working in Israel, okay? But apparently he took the time to jot down this note for Jehoram, which said, this is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. You have not walked in the ways of your father Jehoshaphat or of Asa king of Judah, but you have walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and you have led Judah and the people of Jerusalem to prostitute themselves just as the house of Ahab did. You have also murdered your own brothers, members of your father's house, men who are better than you. So he starts by laying out the case, right? As in, I happen to know all the things you've done, right? Which means God knows all the things that you've done. Verse 14, so here's what you've done. Here's the response that's coming. So now the Lord is about to strike your people, your sons, your wives, and everything that is yours with a heavy blow. You yourself will be very ill with a lingering disease of the bowels until the disease causes your bowels to come out. So, remember what we said about Elijah when we were talking about Elijah? He wasn't an English major, right? He wasn't prone to flowery. Right? So, this is kind of what you might expect in a letter from Elijah, right? You're a murderer, you're wicked, so now God's going to smite your family, and you're going to have this horrible bowel condition that's going to end with them coming out of your body. Verse 16, the Lord aroused against Jehoram the hostility of the Philistines and of the Arabs who live near the Cushites. Okay, so now we've got Edom, Libnah, the Arabs coming out of the desert, the Philistines. He's got war on all sides. They attacked Judah, invaded it, and carried off all the goods found in the king's palace, together with his sons and wives. Not a son was left to him except Ahaziah the youngest. Okay, so they say they carried off his wives and his children, right? This means his wives and his children went off and became slaves somewhere. That's how they lived out the rest of their lives. After all this, the Lord afflicted Jehoram with an incurable disease of the bowels. In the course of time, at the end of the second year, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great pain. Okay, so that pretty much speaks for itself. I don't need to be more descriptive. But, so he, on top of losing everything, literally losing everything, his palace gets pillaged, wives and children, family gone. Right. On top of that, he spends 2 years with this horrible bowel disease and pain, and then finally dies in this pretty ignominious, ugly manner. Right. This is the consequences of the way he chose to live his life. Why do you think he had that one son spared, the youngest son? David's line, right? Otherwise, God probably wouldn't have even let him keep that. And you notice his youngest son Ahaziah is named after his uncle, Ahab's son. It's the same name. There's a note there: his people made no fire in his honor as they had for his father's. Okay, so when he dies, there's no mourning, there's no nothing.
Nobody left to do the
Well, there are plenty of the people. So apparently the people didn't love him either, is what that's saying. So not only does he have no family left, no wealth left, dies this horrible way, but nobody's particularly sad that he's gone. Right, so it's about as destitute as one can get. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He passed away to no one's regret. A blunt way of putting it, and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. They didn't even put him with the rest of the family. They just buried him. Chapter 22, the people of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, Jehoram's youngest son, king in his place, since the raiders who came with the Arabs into the camp had killed all the older sons. So Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaziah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, a granddaughter of Omri.
It says 42. 42. Second verse.
Okay, that's... Now we get the opposite. Remember I said there was that number thing? Okay. The Septuagint, the Greek that the Orthodox Study Bible is based on, has 2. The Hebrew has 42. So those are taking the number from the Hebrew.
So the Septuagint says he reigned 42 years?
No, the opposite.
Huh.
The opposite. Yeah.
One of the versions says that he reigned quite a while.
No, it's how old he was when he became king. Whether he was 22 or 42. Okay, and his mother's name is Athaliah. We finally get the name of Ahab's daughter here. Athaliah. He too walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother encouraged him in doing wrong. So, keep in mind, Athaliah here, Ahab's daughter, has watched war break out on all sides of the kingdom. Right? Presumably she knows about this letter from the prophet Elijah. Presumably she knows about Elijah, given all the trouble Elijah's been causing her parents, right, up in Israel. Okay? Has watched her husband die of this horrible disease over the course of 2 years. Right? And be sort of shoved in a grave ignominiously, and no one's sad. Okay? But has any of that caused her to repent even a little bit? Right? Has any of that caused her to rethink anything? Apparently not. Right? Because she's raising her son to be just like his dad. Right? She's not getting the message. So verse 4, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord as the house of Ahab had done, for after his father's death they became his advisors to his undoing. He also followed their counsel when he went with Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, at Ramoth Gilead. The Arameans wounded Joram, so he returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds they had inflicted on him at Ramoth in his battle with Hazael, king of Aram. You may remember this from 2 Kings when this battle happened. Then Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to see Joram, son of Ahab, because he had been wounded. Through Ahaziah's visit to Joram, God brought about Ahaziah's downfall. When Ahaziah arrived, he went out with Joram to meet Jehu, son of Nimshi, whom the Lord had anointed to destroy the house of Ahab. Remember, Jehu was picked to be the new king, and his first task was wipe out any human being you could find who's even remotely related to Ahab. Right? Because just Ahab dying wasn't enough, as we've seen, for what's going on in Judah. You know, his family is continuing the tradition wherever it is spread. And no matter how many warnings and how many object lessons God is giving them, they're not repenting, they're not changing, they're not going in a different direction. So verse 8, while Jehu was executing judgment on the house of Ahab, he found the princes of Judah and the sons of Ahaziah's relatives who had been attending Ahaziah, and he killed them. He then went in search of Ahaziah, and his men captured him while he was hiding in Samaria. He was brought to Jehu and put to death. They buried him, for they said, he was the son of Jehoshaphat, who sought the Lord with all his heart. So there was no one in the house of Ahaziah powerful enough to retain the kingdom. That was interesting. Even though he behaved like Ahab's great-grandson, when Jehu kills him out of respect, not for him, but respect for Jehoshaphat, his grandfather. Remember? He said Jehoshaphat was a good man and a good king. And so, out of respect for Jehoshaphat, we'll bury him. Right. So there was no one in the house of Ahaziah powerful enough to retain the kingdom. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she proceeded to destroy the whole royal family of the house of Judah. So once again, whole family of Ahab's getting wiped out. Does she repent? Does she rethink? No. She says, okay, well, if my son isn't going to rule Judah, I am. As she goes out and tries to kill everyone from David's family. Number one, out of revenge, I'm guessing, for all the people in her family getting killed. And number two, so that she can then rule herself, because there will be nobody to claim the throne. Verse 11, but Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the royal princes who were about to be murdered, and put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Because Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, and wife of the priest Jehoiada, was Ahaziah's sister, she hid the child from Athaliah so she could not kill him.
In bulrushes?
No. Nor in Egypt. Yeah, nor in Egypt. He remained hidden with them at the temple of God for 6 years while Athaliah ruled the land. Okay, so Athaliah kills most of David's family and succeeds in taking over. But Ahaziah, the king who's just died, his sister is married to a priest. Okay, and they have a son. Okay, so they take that son and they go and they hide him. Hide him in the temple with his father who's a priest. Presumably Athaliah didn't hang around the temple a lot. so there wasn't a lot, very good odds of her showing up there and finding him. But so they went and hid him in the temple with his father so that David's line could continue. But for 6 years now, Athaliah at least thinks she succeeded in wiping out David's family and taking over Judah. Chapter 23.
Excuse me.
Oh, sure.
The sister of Ahaziah, was that also the daughter of the queen, or was that from some other wife?
That was the daughter of Jehoram.
Okay. But not her. I'm really confused all this.
She was Athaliah's sister-in-law.
Okay. Okay.
Okay? So the baby they're hiding is Athaliah's nephew, who, given that there weren't any sons, would have been a male heir to the throne, potentially. Okay. So chapter 23, in the 7th year, Jehoiada showed his strength. Now, Jehoiada is the priest who's the baby's father. He made a covenant with the commanders of units of 100, Azariah son of Jeroham, Ishmael son of Jehohanan, Azariah son of Obed, Maaseiah son of Adiah, and Elishaphat son of Zikri. They went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites and the heads of Israelite families from all the towns. When they came to Jerusalem, the whole assembly made a covenant with the king at the temple of God. So Jehoiada the priest, now his son's a little older, right? He decides the time is right to get Athaliah out of there. So he calls together sort of all the leading families, the heads of the families, the military commanders, right? He gathers them all at the temple, again, because Athaliah doesn't hang out there very much, so gets them all together at the temple for this meeting with this boy who they're planning to be the new king. Jehoiada said to them, "The king's son shall reign as the Lord promised concerning the descendants of David. Now this is what you are to do. 1/3 of you priests and Levites who are going on duty on the Sabbath are to keep watch at the doors. 1/3 of you at the royal palace and 1/3 at the foundation gate. And all the other men are to be in the courtyards of the temple of the Lord. No one is to enter the temple of the Lord except the priests and Levites on duty. They may enter because they are consecrated, but all the other men are to guard what the Lord has assigned to them. The Levites are to station themselves around the king, each man with his weapons in his hand. Anyone who enters the temple must be put to death. Stay close to the king wherever he goes." So basically Jehoiada divvies up the men. He has some protecting who's going to be the new king. He has some watching the entrances to the city, and he has some watching Athaliah's palace to keep an eye on her. Right? Because he's planning something. Verse 8, the Levites and all the men of Judah did just as Jehoiada the priest ordered. Each one took his men, those who were going on duty on the Sabbath and those who were going off duty. For Jehoiada the priest had not released any of the divisions. Then he gave the commanders of units of 100 the spears and the large and small shields that had belonged to King David and that were in the temple of God. He stationed all the men, each with his weapon in his hand, around the king, near the altar in the temple, from the south side to the north side of the temple. Jehoiada and his sons brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. They presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him and shouted, "Long live the king." Okay, so they bring him out. Note this important note that when we read this story the last time, it didn't have there. They gave him a copy of the covenant. Okay. Again, this is returning to that theme of remembering just what it was that the Israelites were committed to by God. So they give him a copy. The idea being the king especially is supposed to study it and know it and then follow it and govern from it.
And the
Right. But this copy of the covenant is probably the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so they anoint him, they crown him, they yell, "Long live the king." Verse 12, when Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and cheering the king, she went to them at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king, standing by his pillar at the entrance. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets, and singers with musical instruments were leading the praises. Then Athaliah tore her robes and shouted, "Treason, treason!" So she's upset, as you might expect, right? Jehoiada the priest sent out the commanders of units of 100 who were in charge of the troops and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said, "Do not put her to death at the temple of the Lord." Okay, so he sends out the military commanders and says, "Don't get any blood in the temple." Right? Okay, so the way they follow that in verse 15, so they seized her as she reached the entrance of the horse gate on the palace grounds, and there they put her to death. Okay, now the horse gate might not have a lot of significance to us, okay, but this is the gate into the palace grounds, right? And there was a gate through which humans came, and there was the gate through which they took the horses and the livestock. Okay, now remember, we're dealing with dirt streets and stuff here. So what do you imagine the area was probably like around the horse gate? So it was not a pleasant place. Okay, so the idea here is that not just that she ends up getting executed for what she's done, but again, like her husband, she dies a pretty awful, nasty, gross kind of death, right? So again, this is the consequence of the way she's chosen to live her life. Verse 16, Jehoiada then made a covenant that he and the people and the king would be the Lord's people. So they reaffirmed the covenant, and then verse 17, to celebrate that, all the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols and killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Okay, now, again, remember Chronicles kind of gives us a rosy picture of a lot of things. Where did this temple of Baal come from? I don't know. It never told us when they built it. But now that it's being torn down, now we hear about it, right? So they go there, they tear it down, they kill the priest. No more temple of Baal. Everybody's reaffirmed the covenant now, this oath, that they're going to be God's people. Verse 18, then Jehoiada placed the oversight of the temple of the Lord in the hands of the priests, who were Levites, to whom David had made assignments in the temple to present the burnt offerings of the Lord as written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and singing as David had ordered. He also stationed doorkeepers at the gates of the Lord's temple so that no one who was in any way unclean might enter. So, interestingly here, remember we talked about when we had all the genealogies and everything in 1 Chronicles, how they wanted to show this continuity, right, between what they were doing going all the way back to David. Well, here, we just had this story where there's some shenanigans going on in the temple grounds, right? We've got all these soldiers in there with weapons, right? They're coronating kings. There's conspiracies and plots going on in the temple, right? That might be a little disturbing for some audiences, right? Thinking, wait, this priest was doing this in the temple? Right? So just to reassure us, the author of Chronicles says, as soon as this was over with, everything went back to normal, right? Everything went back. Temple all got put back the way it's supposed to be. Don't worry. Right? Everything was okay.
And the doorkeepers probably had descendants, right?
Yeah, there was. That was one of the genealogies, in fact, was the doorkeepers. Verse 20, he took with him the commanders of hundreds, the nobles, the rulers of the people, and all the people of the land, and brought the king down from the temple of the Lord. They went into the palace through the upper gate, and seated the king on the royal throne. And all the people of the land rejoiced. The city was quiet because Athaliah had been slain with the sword. So she's gone, peace is back. Right?
Was that uncommon to have a female queen?
That was very uncommon at that period in history. To have someone who wasn't, you would have, for example, if whoever was king was like an infant, then you would have the mother essentially, you might have the mother, if the father's dead, essentially running things, but essentially being queen until he comes of age. That happened. But having it happen where there's just a woman ruling on her own without anybody, that's very uncommon in the ancient world. Almost unheard of. So in that way, she broke new ground. Unfortunately, she chose to use her power and position more like her mom Jezebel than we might have liked. Yeah. So, chapter 24, verse 1, we finally find out the boy king's name. He's the king. Chapter 24, verse 1, Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. There's that ominous note is supposed to be there. Right? He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord for as long as his dad was alive. Is what that's saying. And you're meant to ask the question, well, what happened after that? Well, we'll see what happened after that. Verse 3, Jehoiada chose 2 wives for him, and he had sons and daughters. Sometime later, Joash decided to restore the temple of the Lord. He called together the priests and Levites and said to them, go to the towns of Judah and collect the money due annually from all Israel to repair the temple of your God. Do it now. But the Levites did not act at once. So there's this tax that was supposed to be being taken for the upkeep of the temple. And it wasn't being collected. Probably because the last few kings hadn't cared that much about the upkeep of the temple, right? So Joash says to the Levites, go collect it. We've got to get the temple back in order. We've got to get it spruced up and repaired. And we're going to find out just how bad a disrepair it had fallen into here in a minute. But he says, go out and collect it. The Levites kind of say, oh, okay. And then sit around and don't go do it. Okay. So verse 6, therefore the king summoned Jehoiada the chief priest, his dad, and said to him, why haven't you required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax imposed by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and by the assembly of Israel for the tent of the testimony? Now the sons of that wicked woman Athaliah had broken into the temple of God and had used even its sacred objects for the Baals. So apparently Athaliah, in setting up her little Baal temple that we just heard about getting torn down, had needed some stuff, and so she sent a bunch of her sons over to go and take that stuff from Yahweh's temple and go and use it for worshiping Baal. Okay, so it had been raided. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why we need to replace. So he says, now we need this tax. Verse 8, at the king's command, a chest was made and placed outside at the gate of the temple of the Lord. A proclamation was then issued in Judah and Jerusalem that they should bring to the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, had required of Israel in the desert. So remember, this is when Joash sets up the building fund. Remember, we talked about this in 2 Kings. They put the chest out there by the altar of burnt offering so everybody could come and pay the tax and make their offerings. Now we're going to see again sort of the positive aspect here of Chronicles, the kind of positive spin it puts on things. Verse 10, all the officials and all the people brought their contributions gladly, dropping them into the chest until it was full. It's a little positive spin. Everyone was happy to pay the tax. But remember who this is being written to. There's a tiny little group, right? They're trying to rebuild what? The temple, the rest of the city of Jerusalem. In order to do that, they're going to need the financial support of the whole group, right? So this was, they were happy because it's going to the temple, right?
The Lord loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah, so you should be having to come and help support rebuild the temple.
So if you're not careful, you shouldn't bother.
Yeah, don't bother.
Verse 11, whenever the chest was brought in by the Levites to the king's officials, and they saw that there was a large amount of money, the royal secretary and the officer of the chief priest would come and empty the chest and carry it back to its place. They did this regularly and collected a great amount of money. The king and Jehoiada gave it to the men who carried out the work required for the temple of the Lord. They hired masons and carpenters to restore the Lord's temple, and also workers in iron and bronze to repair the temple. The men in charge of the work were diligent, and the repairs progressed under them. They rebuilt the temple of God according to its original design and reinforced it. When they had finished, they brought the rest of the money to the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made articles for the Lord's temple, articles for the service and for the burnt offerings, and also ladles and other objects of gold and silver. As long as Jehoiada lived, burnt offerings were presented continually in the temple of the Lord. There's that same ominous as long as Joash's dad was alive, all the sacrifices were being offered in the temple the way they were supposed to be. Verse 15, now Jehoiada was old and full of years, and he died at the age of 130. And now notice, he was serving as the high priest all the way up to the end. I won't point out these verses to Metropolitan Philip, don't worry. Verse 16, he was buried with the kings in the city of David because of the good he had done in Israel for God in his temple. Okay, so remember we had a king who wasn't buried with the kings, right? Because of the way he had lived. Jehoiada, for being faithful and what he did, gets buried with the kings. Now the bad news. Verse 17. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. Okay. What is this saying? Well, without his dad there, it's kind of a stabilizing influence. People started showing up and started flattering him. Right? People started showing up with gifts. People started showing up telling him things he wanted to hear. And so, rather than trying to follow what his dad had taught him in terms of how to govern and how to live, or following the copy of the covenant he had been given, he started doing what all his friends, his new friends, wanted him to do. Well, what did that entail? Verse 18. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. Because of their guilt, God's anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. And the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest. Okay. This is the king's brother. Okay. Zechariah the prophet is the king's brother. And there's a book of Zechariah that we'll be reading later. It's written by this Zechariah. Okay. So his own brother stood before the people and said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." So he's saying what we were saying before. He's saying, look, you're going down the wrong road. The road you're going down leads to destruction. You've forgotten about God, and that means God's going to forget about you, and you're going to need him to remember you here, right? And what does he get in return for that? Verse 21, but they plotted against him, and by order of the king they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." Verse 23, at the turn of the year, the army of Aram marched against Joash. Again, what's the first sign that we're way off track? Oh, look, here comes an invading army. Right? It invaded Judah and Jerusalem and killed all the leaders of the people. They sent all the plunder to their king in Damascus. Although the Aramean army had come with only a few men, the Lord delivered into their hands a much larger army. So we have it reversed, right? The Syrians come and attack, and even though the Syrians have a much smaller army than Judah, God gives the Syrians the victory. As Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers, judgment was executed on Joash. When the Arameans withdrew, they left Joash severely wounded. His officials conspired against him for murdering the son of Jehoiada the priest, and they killed him in his bed. So he died and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tombs of the kings. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, son of Shimeath, an Ammonite woman, and Jehozabad, son of Shimrith, a Moabite woman. The account of his sons, the many prophecies about him, and the record of the restoration of the temple of God are written in the annotations on the book of the kings. And Amaziah, his son, succeeded him as king. And so Joash, started out real good, as long as his father was there, and then went off on his own. But you see here, there's a distinction being drawn between Zechariah and these officials. The officials are flattering him and telling him what he wants to hear. And so he follows them, even though it leads him to destruction. Whereas Zechariah comes and tells him the truth and tells him what he needs to hear, and he kills him. Okay. And the message that's being sent to that little remnant group and to us here is the same message. There are a lot of people in our lives who will tell us what we want to hear and just encourage us with whatever decision you make is fine with me. I'll support you no matter what, right? And those people aren't really our friends. Okay? The people who are really our friends are the people who are willing to call us to account. Are the people who are willing to come to us and say, man, you messed up. You need to fix this. Right? You need to get your life together. You need to change some things. Right? Those are our real friends. We tend to not like those people as much. Right? In fact, we look at those people like they're our enemies. But the exact reverse is true. The exact reverse is true. And there's a lot, when we get to the book of Proverbs here, sometime next summer probably, when we get to the book of Proverbs, there's a lot in the book of Proverbs about that. About how it's better to have someone wise rebuke you and tell you you're wrong than to have someone who's foolish tell you you're right. Right? Because if someone foolish tells you you're right, what does that make you? Right? Okay. So, but that's the contrast that we get here in the life of Joash. Chapter 25, Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Jehoiadin. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not wholeheartedly. After the kingdom was firmly in his control, he executed the officials who had murdered his father the king. Yet he did not put their sons to death, but acted in accordance with what is written in the law, in the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sins. So, right now we get this ambivalent picture of him, right? He follows the Lord, but not wholeheartedly, right? He goes out and gets revenge, gets the people who killed his father, but he doesn't take as much revenge as he might have taken. So he's sort of at this point straddling the line, right? He's following the letter of God's law. This is a picture we're getting. He's following sort of the letter of the law of what God said to do, but his heart's not really there, right? His heart's not really there. So verse 5, Amaziah called the people of Judah together and assigned them according to their families to commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds for all Judah and Benjamin. He then mustered those 20 years old or more, and found that there were 300,000 men ready for military service, able to handle the spear and shield. He also hired 100,000 fighting men from Israel for 100 talents of silver. That's 3 3/4 tons of silver. Just for the record. So he gets this group of mercenaries. First he has a draft, put together a big army, and then he hires some mercenaries from Israel to the north. But a man of God came to him and said, O king, these troops from Israel must not march with you, for the Lord is not with Israel, not with any of the people of Ephraim. Even if you go and fight courageously in battle, God will overthrow you before the enemy, for God has the power to help or to overthrow. Okay, so God said, so this prophet comes speaking for God and says, look, you know Israel. Remember Ahab and his family? You know God isn't with them. Okay? So why are you getting their soldiers to fight for you? Right? The point being, you're trying to rely on your military numbers. You're not thinking about God. Okay. So verse 9, Amaziah asked the man of God, but what about the 100 talents I paid for these Israelite troops? See, again, he's not quite, right? Like, he seems to accept it. He says, okay, I should get rid of the Israelite troops. But then he's like, man, I paid a lot of money. Right? That's no good. The man of God replied, the Lord can give you much more than that. So he says, look, I know it's a lot of money, but God has a lot more money than where that came from. Okay, so just, follow what God wants. So Amaziah dismissed the troops who had come to him from Ephraim and sent them home. They were furious with Judah and left for home in a great rage. So he sends them back home, and they're all ticked off. We come down here to fight. Well, they didn't get the money. The king of Israel got the money. And they didn't get to fight. And presumably if they had gotten to go fight, they would have gotten to plunder the enemy. See, which would have been what they were hoping for. So they get sent back home with nothing. Verse 11, Amaziah then marshaled his strength and led his army to the valley of Salt, where he killed 10,000 men of Seir. The army of Judah also captured 10,000 men alive, took them to the top of a cliff and threw them down so that all were dashed to pieces. You remember back in Deuteronomy, the rules about how they were supposed to make war? Did that include taking 100,000 prisoners and throwing them off a cliff? Answer's no. Right? That's not how they were supposed to make war. That's not how they were supposed to treat prisoners. Okay? So again, right, Amaziah goes about, he wins, but then look at how he does it. Verse 13, meanwhile, the troops that Amaziah had sent back and had not allowed to take part in the war raided Judean towns from Samaria to Beth-horon. They killed 3,000 people and carried off great quantities of plunder. So the guys from Israel say, well, I'm not going to him empty-handed. So on their way back home to Israel, they go and just start raiding towns in Judah and getting their plunder there. Right? Raiding, stealing, killing, pillaging. Which again shows you that what the prophet said about where Israel at is probably pretty true. Their hired soldiers are going to behave that way. Verse 14, when Amaziah returned from slaughtering the Edomites, he brought back the gods of the people of Seir. He set them up as his own gods, bowed down to them, and burned sacrifices to them. Okay. Now let's follow this. He goes, he wipes out these people. He captures 100,000 of them and throws them off a cliff. And then when he comes home, he decides to worship their gods. Okay, right? Okay, again, he's not... yeah, he's not a sound thinker here. Verse 15, the anger of the Lord burned against Amaziah, and he sent a prophet to him who said, why do you consult this people's gods, which could not save their own people from your hand? Right? He's like, if these gods couldn't help them, right, when you came and killed them, what makes you think they're going to help you? Right? Verse 16, while he was still speaking, the king said to him, have we appointed you an advisor to the king? Stop, why be struck down? Okay, so the prophet comes and makes this very logical point, right? The king, probably realizing that, yes, what he did was awfully stupid, right? Tells him to shut up or he's going to kill him. Okay, don't make a fool out of me. Right? Don't make a fool out of me in front of everybody. So the prophet stopped but said, I know that God is determined to destroy you because you have done this and have not listened to my counsel. After Amaziah, king of Judah, consulted with his advisors, he sent this challenge to Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel. Come meet me face to face. Okay? So for his next brilliant idea, Amaziah, probably still upset about what those Israelite mercenaries did in sacking his towns and everything, sends to the king of Israel and basically says, come out and fight me. Okay, and this is his new ingenious plan.
Wait, I thought Joash was killed.
Joash was Amaziah's father. Jehoash is the current king of Israel. Okay. So he says to the king of Israel, come out and fight me. Right? But Jehoash, king of Israel, responded to Amaziah, king of Judah. A thistle in Lebanon sent a message to a cedar in Lebanon. Give your daughter to my son in marriage. Then a wild beast in Lebanon came along and trampled the thistle underfoot. Okay? Well, so what is this about? He's saying to Amaziah, you're like a little thistle on the ground. I'm like a cedar tree. Right? And you're coming to me and saying all this stuff. I'm just going to ignore you and let you be trampled underfoot. Right? You're beneath my notice. Right? Someone else will take care of you. Okay. So verse 19, you say to yourself that you have defeated Edom, and now you are arrogant and proud. But stay at home. Why ask for trouble and cause your own downfall and that of Judah also? Okay, so he basically not only says, you're beneath my notice, he says, I know you think you're hot stuff because you went and killed some Edomites. Right? But you come out and fight me, and not only are you going to die, you're going to end up losing your whole kingdom. So just stay home. Just forget about it. Verse 20, Amaziah, however, would not listen, for God so worked that he might hand them over to Jehoash because they sought the gods of Edom. So Jehoash, king of Israel, attacked. He and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced each other at Beth Shemesh in Judah. Judah was routed by Israel, and every man fled to his home. Jehoash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, at Beth Shemesh. Then Jehoash brought him to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, a section about 600 feet long. He took all the gold and silver and all the articles found in the temple of God that had been in the care of Obed-Edom, together with the palace treasures and the hostages, and returned to Samaria. Okay. Notice here that once again in Chronicles, it's all about Judah, and Israel is treated basically like a pagan country. Right? They come in and raid the temple and raid the palace the same way other foreign invaders do. Okay, but Amaziah ends up exactly the way Jehoash said he would. Verse 25, Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, lived for 15 years after the death of Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. As for the other events of Amaziah's reign, from beginning to end, are they not written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel? From the time that Amaziah turned away from following the Lord, they conspired against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent men after him to Lachish and killed him there. He was brought back by horse and was buried with his father in the city of Judah. Okay, so he doesn't die in battle. It's worse. At least he might have had a glorious death in battle. He gets hunted down by his own men, and he has to run and hide. Ultimately gets assassinated. Chapter 26. Then all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in place of his father Amaziah. He was the one who rebuilt Elath and restored it to Judah after Amaziah rested with his fathers. Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. His mother's name was Jecholiah. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success. He went to war against the Philistines and broke down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. He then rebuilt towns near Ashdod and elsewhere among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabs who lived in Gur-Baal and against the Maonites. The Ammonites brought tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread as far as the border of Egypt, because he had become very powerful. So here, you can see how quickly, based on the king's relationship to God, how quickly things turn back and forth. You know, Jehoshaphat is on the right track. He's got peace, he's got success, things are good. Right? But as soon as his son goes the other way, the whole thing goes the other way. Right? but vice versa. Right? We've had a couple of evil kings. We've gotten to the point where Israel is raiding and pillaging the temple and pillaging the palace. Now we get someone who follows God, and boom, now they're gaining territory. Right? Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, at the valley gate, and at the angle of the wall, and he fortified them. He also built towers in the desert and dug many cisterns, because he had much livestock in the foothills and in the plain. He had people working his fields and vineyards in the hills and in the fertile lands, for he loved the soil. Uzziah had a well-trained army ready to go out by divisions according to their numbers, as mustered by Jael the secretary and Maaseiah the officer under the direction of Hananiah, one of the royal officials. The total number of family leaders over the fighting men was 2,600. Under their command was an army of 307,500 men trained for war, a powerful force to support the king against his enemies. Uzziah provided shields, spears, helmets, coats of armor, bows, and sling stones for the entire army. In Jerusalem he made machines designed by skillful men for use on the towers and on the corner defenses to shoot arrows and hurl large stones. His fame spread far and wide, for he was greatly helped until he became powerful. Notice that everywhere where it talks about him becoming powerful, it talks about him being helped by God. Right? Those two go hand in hand. And so, most effect does the fame. Remember, again, we said several times as we've been going along the Old Testament here, the whole purpose of Israel and Judah was to reveal to all the other nations around them who God is. Right? So when he follows God, his fame spreads, but so does God's, who's helping him. Now verse 16. Things change again. But after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Azariah the priest with 80 other courageous priests of the Lord followed him in. They confronted him and said, "It is not right for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is for the priests, the descendants of Aaron, who have been consecrated to burn incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and you will not be honored by the Lord God." To say these are courageous priests right, is an understatement. Okay? King decides he's going to go into the temple and offer incense, right? Which they all know he's supposed to do, but these priests have the guts to go in there and not only tell him, "Hey, get out of here," right? The guy who could have them all killed, "Hey, get out of here, you're not allowed in here," but to tell him, because you're sinning like this, God isn't going to be with you anymore. Right? To actually pronounce judgment against him. Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand ready to burn incense, became angry. While he was raging at the priests in their presence, before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy broke out on his forehead. When Azariah the chief priest and all the other priests looked at him, they saw that he had leprosy on his forehead, so they hurried him out. Indeed, he himself was eager to leave because the Lord had afflicted him. King Uzziah had leprosy until the day he died. He lived in a separate house, leprous and excluded from the temple of the Lord. Jotham his son had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land. The other events of Uzziah's reign, from beginning to end, are recorded by the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz. So that's a hint. When we get to the book of Isaiah, we're going to read more about Uzziah. Uzziah rested with his fathers and was buried near them in a field for burial that belonged to the kings, for people said he had leprosy. And Jotham his son succeeded him as king. You can see how the punishment sort of fits the crime here. Right? His crime was, got a little proud, got a little arrogant, tried to overstep what he was allowed to do and what he was supposed to do, specifically in the temple. So he gets leprosy, which means he can't ever go to the temple again. At all. Because he's unclean now. Right. So, tries to push too far and he gets excluded. Chapter 27, Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. But unlike him, he did not enter the temple of the Lord. So that's a good thing. The people, however, continued their corrupt practices. Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord and did extensive work on the wall at the hill of Ophel. He built towns in the Judean hills and forts and towers in the wooded areas. Jotham made war on the king of the Ammonites and conquered them. That year the Ammonites paid him 100 talents of silver, 10,000 cores of wheat, and 10,000 cores of barley. The Ammonites brought him the same amount also in the second and third years. Jotham grew powerful because he walked steadfastly before the Lord God. The other events in Jotham's reign, including all his wars and the other things he did, are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Jotham rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And Ahaz, his son, succeeded him as king.
Maybe we did that.
Yeah. He did things right. There's still a couple more good guys. We're not to Josiah yet. Remember, Josiah is our last hope there. Chapter 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. So we're right back. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and also made cast idols for worshiping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom and sacrificed his sons in the fire. Remember, we talked about the valley of Hinnom that Jesus referred to. It's Gehenna in Greek. That this is where they worship Molech, and they would go and essentially, without going into further grisly detail, burn their infant children to death as a sacrifice to this pagan god. So not only is he making Baal idols, but he's going and sacrificing children in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites, he offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. So basically, any place he could find a pagan shrine, he was all over it, right? Find him a tree, he'd go there and do a pagan ritual. Right. Therefore the Lord his God handed him over to the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hands of the king of Israel, who inflicted heavy casualties on him. In one day Pekah son of Remaliah killed 120,000 soldiers in Judah, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Zikri, an Ephraimite warrior, killed Maaseiah the king's son, Azrikam the officer in charge of the palace, and Elkanah second to the king. The Israelites took captive from their kinsmen 200,000 wives, sons, and daughters. They also took a great deal of plunder, which they carried back to Samaria. But a prophet of the Lord named Oded was there, and he went out to meet the army when it returned to Samaria. He said to them, "Because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he gave them into your hand. But you have slaughtered them in a rage that reaches to heaven. Now you intend to make the men and women of Judah and Jerusalem your slaves. But aren't you also guilty of sins against the Lord your God? Now listen to me, send back your fellow countrymen you have taken as prisoners, for the Lord's fierce anger rests on you." Okay, so God allows Israel to have victory over Judah because Judah's got off track, but the Israelites decide to haul off a whole bunch of Judahites as slaves. And as we remember from back in Deuteronomy, taking your fellow Israelites as slaves, big no-no, right? We don't do that ever, okay? Then they're taking hundreds of thousands. Okay, so God sends a prophet out to say, time out. Right? Yes, you won, okay? But you won because Judah was evil, not because you were good, right? And you're evil too. So unless you want God's judgment the way Judah just got God's judgment, you're going to let those slaves go back home. Right? Verse 12, then some of the leaders in Ephraim, Azariah son of Jehohanan, Berechiah son of Meshillemoth, Jehezkiah son of Shallum, and Amasa son of Hadlai confronted those who were arriving from the war. "You must not bring those prisoners here," they said, "or we will be guilty before the Lord. Do you intend to add to our sin and guilt? For our guilt is already great, and his fierce anger rests on Israel." So the soldiers gave up the prisoners and plunder in the presence of the officials and all the assembly. The men designated by name took the prisoners, and from the plunder they clothed all who were naked. They provided them with clothes and sandals, food and drink, and healing balm. All those who were weak they put on donkeys. So they took them back to their fellow countrymen at Jericho, the city of palms, and returned to Samaria. At that time, King Ahaz, well, let me stop here a second. So, not only do the people in Israel listen and say, that's right, we've got enough, we've got enough on our back with these last few kings we've had, right? We don't need to be taking these slaves. But they go farther, right? And the slaves who are there who don't have clothes, they go and take from the plunder that's rightfully there and clothe them, put them on donkeys, return them. So that they actually go out of their way to show kindness. So show kindness to these people that they've defeated. Okay? Again, who is this written to? Our little remnant of people who's besieged all the time, right? Well, this is telling them something about how they're to treat people after they win. Right? Just because God gives you the victory, because God's on your side, doesn't mean you can do whatever you want with the people you've beaten. Right? In fact, it's making the point that the fact that you just won that battle doesn't necessarily mean that God was on your side. It just means God was against them. Right? And now you need to watch yourself. Now you need to watch yourself and your success. Okay. So verse 16, at that time King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help. Remember who the Assyrians are. Not a good idea. The Edomites had again come and attacked Judah and carried away prisoners, while the Philistines had raided towns in the foothills and in the negative of Judah. So Ahaz becomes king, turns evil, gets attacked by the Syrians, the Israelites, the Philistines, right? Again, this is the first sign. Everybody comes in and attacks from all directions. They captured and occupied Beth Shemesh, Aijalon, and Gederoth, as well as Soko, Timnah, and Gimzo, and their surrounding villages. The Lord had humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had promoted wickedness in Judah and had been most unfaithful to the Lord. Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came to him, but he gave him trouble instead of help, as we might expect from the Assyrians. Remember, we talked about the Assyrians. What were the Assyrians all about? They were all about conquering cities, right? Enlarging their empire. And they didn't care how many thousands of men, women, and children they had to kill to do it, right? These are not the guys who you call and ask for help, right? When you're in trouble and you're getting attacked by all sides, right? I mean, that's sort of like if there were wars breaking out in the 1930s in Central America, and they wrote and asked Hitler to come help them, straighten out, right? Not a good plan. Okay, he's not going to show up and be your buddy. Okay. So he comes and he brings trouble instead of help. Verse 21, Ahaz took some of the things from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace and from the princes and presented them to the king of Assyria, but that did not help him. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. Right? We would hope for the opposite, right? In his time of trouble, where God sends these things with the hope that they'll turn back. We saw that over and over again in Judges. The people would be going off on their merry way, doing horrible things, and God would send someone to oppress them, and then they'd go, oh, we forgot about God. And they'd come back and say, oh, God, please help us. And then God would come and deliver them, and then they'd go back about their evil deeds, right? But now we're past even that. Now the king, right, he's in all this trouble. He's got everyone in the world at the time practically attacking him except Egypt. And instead of turning back to God, he doubles down on wickedness. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus, who had defeated him. For he thought, since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them so they will help me. So this is like the Syrians are beating me, so I'll sacrifice to their gods, and maybe their gods will turn on them, and I'll win. That's his. But they were his downfall and the downfall of all Israel. Ahaz gathered together the furnishings from the temple of God and took them away. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple and set up altars at every street corner in Jerusalem. In every town in Judah he built high places to burn sacrifices to other gods and provoked the Lord, the God of his fathers, to anger. The other events of his reign and all his ways from beginning to end are written in the books of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of Jerusalem, but he was not placed in the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son succeeded him as king. Okay? So Ahaz, we're probably at a pretty good low point for Judah. Right? For Judah. Because and he stands, we started out tonight with Jehoshaphat. We're ending up here tonight with Ahaz. We see sort of the polar opposites. Right? Jehoshaphat, the one thing you can say about him for sure is that every time he's going to try and do something, he goes before the Lord first. Right? He goes to God. Is this what I should do? Is this right? Is this what I should do? Is this the way I should go? We're being attacked. Doesn't even look to his military. Doesn't call in his commanders. Doesn't have a draft. He just goes straight to God. They're attacking us. If you're not on our side, we're going to lose. Right? And God goes and kills them all for him. Right? So he doesn't even have to do anything. Right? That's Jehoshaphat on the one side. On the other side, we have Ahaz. Right? He was trying to do everything by his own smarts, his own tactics. Right? Well, maybe I can get the Assyrians to come help me. They don't like the Syrians. Right? Maybe I can, hey, the Syrians are winning, so if I sacrifice to their gods, maybe I can, right? He's trying to wheel and deal and resort to his own devices, turning farther and farther away from God the whole time. The whole time. Right? And so the temptation, we've got this little group there. This little group in Judah. Right? The temptation is going to be, they've got all these troubles. They got people all around them who are hostile. Right? They got people in their midst who are wanting to turn away and worship other gods. Right? All this fear and distress. Temptation is going to be, gee, maybe we can make an alliance with Egypt or something to protect us. Right? Maybe if we go over here and ally with these people and worship their gods, maybe, right? Try and come up with a plan. Try and figure something out to worm their way out of it. Right? What are they being told the answer is? No, you need to take all that fear and all that worry, all that concern, you need to take it to God. You need to take it to the Lord. Okay? Because it doesn't matter how big their army is, he'll kill the army for you. Right? Doesn't matter how much money you spend on the mercenaries, he can give you more money. Right? God's in control of all of this. Just take it to him and rely on him. And that's the same message then that comes to us in this world, where we're surrounded by all kinds of stuff trying to get us to go in all kinds of directions. Trying to get us to chase after and worship money, to chase after and worship youth and beauty and strength and power and all these things, pulling us in different directions, right? Wanting us to throw our lot in with this group is promising us this, and this group is promising us this, and they want us to join them, and they want us to join them, right? And God's telling us, if we try to get through this life living on our own wits, trying to strategize, trying to figure all these things out, trying to place our bets in the right places, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. We're going to end up like Ahaz. Right? We're going to get trouble instead of help, right, from these things. The only answer for us is to take these things before him. Right? Because it doesn't matter how broke we are, he's got all the money in the world, literally. Right? It doesn't matter how scared we are, he can protect us and defeat anything we're worried about. Right? Doesn't matter how lonely and isolated we are, he's everywhere, and he's there, and he loves us. Right? So that's what we're being told here in Chronicles. Right? That we have a Lord who not only wants us to follow him and worship him, but who loves us, and if we let him, will care for us and protect us. Right? If we're willing to let him and not try to get by on our own smarts, however much smarts those may be. Okay? So that's where we're going to leave off for tonight. Next week, for sure, we'll get done with 2 Chronicles because we're almost at the end. We just finished chapter 28, so we're going to be picking up at 29 next time with Hezekiah. And so next time for sure we'll be finishing 2 Chronicles. And then we'll talk about what comes next in terms of 1st and 2nd Ezra. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.